Professor Lipstein, last week we covered the period after the war and the influence of Willi Steiner. He left in 1959, and perhaps we can talk about the library staff and the committee members who continued after Willi left. Do you recall Mr. Gordon Hughes, who in 1961 was appointed as second assistant?
We were looking for a librarian, and at that time trained legal librarians were not easily to be found. So Hughes came as an administrator, and he did his job very efficiently with a pleasant manner, appreciated by everybody. But of course he wasn't a legal expert, and the result was that things were administered well, but that was all he could do.
So he became the Squire Law Librarian, as you say, in an administrative capacity, with no college teaching, and he had the degree of MA conferred upon him, and then he retired in 1982 because of ill health.
I believe that is so, but I cannot remember it.
Do you have any recollections of Mr. Pritchard from 1962?
Very little. He was, of course, a student at Cambridge and became a member of Caius College, always interested in property and legal history, and always a very reliable man. But I cannot say much more.
Mr. Jolowitz, who was here between 63 and 65?
Again, I cannot remember much because I may or may not have talked to him when I was young, but of his work on the library, I have no particular recollection. A competent person at all times.
Any recollections of Mr. Lauterpacht, later Sir Ellie, who started on the committee in 1964?
He was, of course, always interested in public international law, and as far as I can think of, he must have helped us a good deal on that basis. That was his great strength.
So he helped to build up the collection. And in 1968, Mr. Major became the Squire Librarian, and while he was in his position, the library expanded into the ground floor of the Cockerell building. Do you have any recollections of this period?
I remember slightly that it relieved us of the duty when we went to the library to go up a staircase to the first floor. Instead of that, we were much enlarged and we needed more space, so that it was a great relief to have the ground floor, and it made the whole building more easily accessible because you started on the ground floor and then worked your way upwards. Moreover, it was possible then to keep all the technical machinery downstairs.
Now, Professor Clive Parry, who was Professor of International Law from 1969 to 1982, served on the Library Committee from November 1966, and in 1976 he became the chairman. I know he was a personal friend of yours. Do you have any recollections that you can share with me?
I remember him well when he came as a student, because he was a child prodigy and had obtained a degree of LLB in Birmingham at the age of 19, and came to Cambridge, to Downing College, to read for what was then the LLB, which he did with his usual efficiency, to the extent that when he was being examined on the whole scholarship, and he found that the paper didn't cover the syllabus, he stopped the examination and had the paper reset. It gives an idea of the man's energy, courage, and general imagination. He did very well in his exams, then, if I remember rightly, obtained some kind of grant to study in the famous Institute of Public International in Berlin, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, and that's where he was in 1938, when he quickly left because war looked like threatening. Came back, and we worked together quite a lot, especially on the digest of international law, which was the work of Buckner and Lauterpacht father. He was a great friend, as he especially showed in times when I was in difficulties, and there were such times, both professionally and financially, and then especially later on when the war came and I was in difficulties because of my status.
How did he help you in that way?
He helped me certainly when I needed money to pay for being admitted to the bar, that I could have gone to my family, my great-uncle. He certainly helped when I was interned and saw to it that the necessary people were mobilized to get me to apply to the Home Office to get me home. We worked a great deal together. His energy, his critical energy, and his general interest in literature and anything made him a stimulating companion.
Professor, can you tell me anything more about his work?
Well, while I knew him, he wrote, I think, 1 or 2 books, one on nationality, if I remember rightly. But he never spoke much to me about his work. That's not as well as I did not speak to him about my work. The only interesting things which might be recorded is that he's the expert of having married the same woman 4 times in one day.
How come?
He was, during the war, first attached to the Black Watch, but was invalided out. And at that moment he became a professor of international law in the University of Ankara in Turkey. I do not know what his actual position was, and I never asked him. But in that connection he got to know the secretary of the American ambassador, and in fact proposed to her and was accepted. Since she was a member of the American embassy, a consular marriage in the American consulate was indicated, but he was British, and therefore a similar consular marriage in the British embassy was indicated. But he was also an employee of the Turkish state, therefore a civil marriage was proper, and perhaps a religious marriage might make the matter look firmer. He was, during the war, in Turkey, and had a varied experience. He often saw the German ambassador, didn't speak to him, one von Papen, and he told me that at the end of the war, when the German embassy was occupied by the Allies, it turned out that they had a direct telephone line to the British embassy, which the British embassy did not know. He then came to England, was a fellow of Downing, was the law fellow there, a very energetic person, and when we built a house, and we had to build a house big enough, which took 2 parties, he became the co-tenant, and we lived happily together for 10 years.
And then he moved?
And I saw less of him after that, but we always kept in great contact.
Yes, I understand he was a very charismatic man.
Yes, if you could take his critical ability.
Thank you. Do you recall Mr. Hopkins, who began, of course he's still your friend, but do you have recollections of him during 1970 when he was on the library committee?
I really have no idea. We are now very much connected together because we are both benchers of the Middle Temple, but I cannot say that at that time, he was a very young man, I can't remember, but he was a creation of Clive Parry.
Did he help him with the treaty theory?
He helped with everything.
and Professor Stein, who was on the committee in 71.
He was, of course, by then quite an authority, but I cannot really remember anything particular which he did.
So in 1971, Professor Baker, who is now the distinguished legal historian, became the Squire Law Librarian, and while he was in this position, Willie Steiner's classification and recataloguing were completed. Then Baker resigned to become a full-time university lecturer. Do you have any recollection of this time in the early 70s?
Not really. Baker was really a scholar, not a librarian, and I didn't have very much contact with him.
In 1973, you became the chairman of the library committee.
I never remember that I had been. I thought I'd never allowed to be.
But you were active on the library committee for many years.
I was for many years, and of course I knew a good deal about those parts of the library which other members did not know so intimately, and so I could be of some help.
And you were responsible for building up the private international law and the
foreign law.
Yes. Mr. Glazebrook, 1974.
I cannot really remember anything.
And Mr. Turpin?
Again, no doubt they were helpful, but I cannot remember any particular activity.
O'Higgins, Dr. O'Higgins?
Higgins was a public international lawyer who was really more interested in his own work, and but a nice, agreeable, and helpful person.
Presumably he helped to develop the public international.
He was interested in public international law, and he also was an Irishman, and therefore could help with the Irish collection.
So in 1982, the library was incorporated administratively into the UL. Do you have any recollections of this? For example, the circumstances under which this happened, and what, if any, were the consequences upon the readers?
I have no direct recollections, except that as far as I remember, we were not very happy about it. It meant that the financial side got into a much bigger administration and didn't give us either the extent nor the manner in which we could administer our own affairs. The Steiner modification of the classification was, I think, accepted as something strategically excellent, though people found it difficult to get accustomed to it.
But in terms of the staffing, there were no...
There was no difficulty.
No, I mean, there were no additional staff appointments that were made as a result of being incorporated into the US.
Certainly not.
No. Now, in 1983, Mr. McVeigh was appointed as the Squire Law Librarian, and he oversaw the move to the new quarters in 1995, when the library moved from the Cockerell building to the Sidgwick site. What were the reasons for the move, Professor? Can you remember?
It's difficult for me now to say whether it's more the university administration which was keen to take over the part of the Cockerell building, or whether it was our difficulty in accommodating our books. I think both agreed, and the only question was who would have to give way to whom. If we took over the whole building of the Cockerell building, the university administration would have had to build a new building. It would probably have been the better answer. It would have given them greater technical ability. But no, it wasn't done. The easier and quicker way was taken, that we had to go out and they could enlarge.
Architecturally, the new building is controversial.
It certainly was controversial from the beginning because of the whole structure, which combined lecture rooms, administration, and the library in a way in which the lecture rooms on the ground level were not insulated, so that any change of audience within each hour meant a great deal of noise, of people moving. This was already realized by the committee, and the university librarian resigned because he took exception to the form of the building. So it was a controversial matter with a very famous architect who had his own way. It then turned out, of course, that there was too much noise, and considerably expensive changes had to be made.
So in your opinion, was the move a success?
It certainly gave us more room, but it gave up that feeling of, may I say, coziness which the old library had. Nice wooden paneling, big tables which lawyers need, comfortable chairs. Instead of that, we have a modern building of concrete with vast open spaces, and small tables which are not good for lawyers who need many books in front of them, and chairs which were designed by the architect or his minions, and which are less comfortable than what we had before.
So if you were to contrast the facilities that you enjoyed at the old buildings,
I would go back.
So it occurs to me that you are probably unique in that you're the only person who's ever worked in all three of the Squire Library buildings, the Downing Street, the Cockerell building and the Sidgwick site. Is it true to say this?
That is quite correct. I certainly began in 1934 on the Downing site.
And none of your colleagues who were with you at that time?
Oh, nobody who was there with me is still alive. Nor, for that matter, are many who were with me in the Cockerell building.
Well, thank you, Professor, very much.